Good afternoon. As Vanessa's just said, continuity of carer has been mentioned almost at every juncture today. Not as a saviour pill, but as a way forward, a structured way forward that actually, as women and families need, but actually also as very passionate members of staff who want the very best for our communities. Now, when we're going to have 5 or 6 updates. None of these sit in their silo. You give them, oh, right. None of these sit in their silo. That each one is interlinked and interdependent, and you'll see that as we go forward today. So yes, I'm going to do a couple of practical things, but this is one of our ways right across the country to actually improve all of the experiences we have, but actually to make a difference to our families. Because we've listened to all of the stories today, and actually, we're listening today, but we didn't hear when all of you spoke before. So a lot of the times, it's actually being heard, being listened to, and actually having, because a lot of you in this room have helped put our plan together. And the one thing that resonated with me and across the group is telling your story only once, not repeating that story, and actually having the trust that that story's been listened to. So this is just an overview of why we're doing it. In Better Births, there's some very hard facts about how we can improve. Some of them we don't quite understand yet, but it's that trust, that's that value, it's that listening to that sometimes we can't quantify. But it's actually, how do we improve? How do we link all of that? So we heard this morning, and within the postnatal care, that actually a lot of pilots have been taking place. So we need to incorporate all that learning as well. So that learning was actually, because every single woman's pregnancy counts, and that continuity of carer for every woman. But actually, how do we start? Where do we put our measures down so that we can make that impact? And right across the country, it's actually saying we've got a lot of good developed pathways for our most vulnerable. And actually, how do we get the learning out of that and transfer that? So we've heard of Embrace and what's come out of that today as well. So I think we've taken this back right for our own LMS, and the sense or consensus across there was actually to look at right across the pathway, but for multiple pregnancies, especially then diabetic pregnancies. That was one of the elements that we had that, because we know that as a network we work very closely together, so it would be silly not to make those links. High-risk pregnancies, again, linking back to the national learning. From an elective caesarean section pathway, I think we're all doing an awful lot of work with that. Kathy shared the video from Lancashire Teaching. Again, it's getting that consistency of message. Teenage pregnancies, we know that actually across our LMS and across other LMSs, those numbers are decreasing. But again, it's actually having that understanding. And again, we talked about the bereaved pathway or the rainbow pathway that we have that's developing across all of our networks as well. So what we have to do as well, I'm looking at Vanessa now, I haven't put the 20% on here. What our ask is for all of our LMSs is to have 20% of all women on a continuity of care pathway by March. Now, I'm not always a fan of targets and numbers, but sometimes we've got to put our bar there. And actually, that is quite tough for us, but also that's still only 1 in 5. So it's actually doing that balancing act as we've discussed today. And I've worked with Joe, who's actually done the slides as well and not taken the, to actually say, get something quite simple where we can actually do that measure, put it back into the system so that actually women's voices, women's stories can actually influence. Did we get that right? but also for the staff. Because actually, better births has actually been quite challenging, and so it should be. But it's actually that positive challenge putting back in of how did that feel as a staff member when you know that it was the right care for that woman, that family. So when we're looking at our key factors, and this is actually not a huge slide, but it is enormous in how we actually do this. Because I've just mentioned the challenge that Better Births has given us. So actually our key messages within all of our environments where we give care is our education, our training, our engagement, how we work. Because a lot of our workforce need to use these services as well. So what do we want to deliver and what do we want to receive? Again, our MVPs have been essential in actually in all that reflection, and actually the You Said We Did has to be a constant pathway of making sure that we're getting the pathways right. We mentioned the W word this morning, the workforce, and again it's actually what does continuity of care look like? What does that team look like? What does that family need? Because we've just said we're going to initially concentrate on the most vulnerable. So that's going to be a multidisciplinary team. But some teams, shapes and locations will all look different because some may need all of our high-tech hospital services. And you're going to hear about community hubs in a while as well. But actually, what's the value of that? Making sure that we have got the maternity pathway correct, but actually also helping lead into the rest of that babyhood as well. Because I've heard, and one of the things that stuck with me is we had a conversation with the LMS at Surrey, and their life expectancy there is 92. So I expected to hear about frailty, I expected to hear about dementia, and that was absolutely on their agenda. What was their top priority? The first 1,000 days. So they, even though they had all of that requirement, their priority was the first 1,000 days. And I have to say, because we say it all the time, it absolutely just hit me there that we're doing it right. You have to get it right at the beginning to get that whole lifetime pathway. Now I'm on my soapbox. Right, I'll keep going. Right, back to the where we're at. So again, it's actually saying we can be passionate, we can get that message out, but we also have to be very critical of ourselves and make sure we measure ourselves. So to me, it is making sure, are those women on the pathway, but then listening to the stories, how did that measure up with your expectations, Jen, just as you've been talking about? Angela, I'm hogging the mic. Would you like it? All right, okay. No. Right, so I'm holding on to the mic. I've just chosen one quote. I actually have other quotes that I'll put up for the workshops later because, again, the measurement is excellent, but actually it is the outcome. It is the feeling. It is the journey that our families take that is absolutely important, and that's what we've heard today. But again, we have to be able to have that underpinning us. So yes, we get bits of it right, but other times we just fall down at other areas. So it's making that whole pathway fit. So as the 4 providers, I'm not always fussed on that word, within the LMS, we have actually got a consensus that we're going to look at diabetes and our other high-risk pregnancies. We're also going to play to our strengths. If there are particular population needs within Blackpool, within Morecambe Bay, within Lancashire Teaching and East Lancs, then actually we look after our populations. We're not chasing a number or a pathway. We're making sure that we're doing the most important things for the families and communities that we serve.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
And just to reiterate, continuity carer, it's not a brand new way of working. A lot of us will remember we worked this way in the 90s, and it speaks volumes for itself. It has got the advantages. So we just need to look at how now we launch it forward again. But, you know, we know it is the way forward to work. Oh, sorry, one more thing. And continuity carer is now being rolled out, or is being talked about in other branches of care within community settings, not just in maternity. So it is being held up as a pillar of a good example as well.
Right. I know quite a few of you have helped with just getting our initial priorities correct. Is there anything else you want to add from our LMS point of view? We did actually have a huge amount of people at the last meeting, so everybody's, hopefully, voice has been heard.
Sorry, it was just to say that as a GP, we're actually quite privileged because we have the same community midwife. She comes in twice a week, and the relationship that we have with her is great. As I've said earlier, I serve quite a deprived population. We have lots of safeguarding within our surgery, which is quite difficult. But the relationship that we have with Rosie, our midwife, means that the families know that I'm involved, and they also know that Rosie knows everything that's going on. So I think just really to reiterate really that it makes a massive difference to the care that the women and the family receives throughout the whole of the pregnancy.
It's the relationship building between disciplines, different members of staff, but that trust and relationship with the woman and the family, it has to be at the central fulcrum of everything that we do. Then you can build everything else onto it, but it's that trust. Going back to the very first slide, we're not quite sure why you reduce preterm births by 23%. It's not that easily measured. But if you trust and believe in the people that surround you, and you're not telling your story again, then obviously you're going to be more relaxed. You're going to enjoy your experience much more. And be able to feel that you can ask that question, that you can say, no, I don't want that. What about? What if? And have that dialogue.